I now have the pleasure of introducing and welcoming the Honourable Pierre Poilievre, Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And Mr. Poilievre will be providing us with some remarks from the Conservative Party of Canada. He will be taking, I think, up to 5 questions at the end of his speaking. So as I invite you to the mic, Mr. Poilievre, I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank John Barlow for being such a good friend of agriculture. John, as the Conservatives' party ag critic, he has been a fantastic supporter of our industry, and we really appreciate him. So thank you, John. And Mr. Poilievre.
Merci beaucoup d'être venu.
Thank you very much.
And I'm told that I confused, the Prime Minister and I jointly confused the crowd because he was wearing a blue tie and I'm wearing a red one. So it's kind of, I guess it's a bit of a non-partisan event, but how about this? I'll be conservative in my remarks if you're liberal in your applause. That'll be our deal. It's great to be with my friend, the Shadow Minister of Agriculture, John Barlow from southern Alberta, from High River Country, a great voice for farmers nationwide. He's been fighting for everyone across the nation, all the way to PEI, where he's the #1 champion of the potato farmers, the besieged potato farmers who can't sell their seed potatoes. I hear his name at farm gates from coast to coast to coast to coast. And John is an unrelenting champion of agriculture. My grandfather used to live in his riding, and when I went out to visit before my grandfather died, John and I decided we'd go and visit a senior's home in High River, and I walked up to a lady there and I said, do you know who I am? And she said, no, but if you ask the nurse, she'll tell you who you are. So it's good to be made grounded. I want to start by telling the story of Suntech tomatoes, the little miracles of Manotick. If you get in your car and drive about 35 minutes southwest of here, you can go and visit their farm right off of River Road, south of Manotick, and they have a greenhouse where they grow tiny little delicious tomatoes. Unfortunately, though, they were stuck paying the carbon tax on the CO2 they release into the greenhouse, even though that CO2 is absorbed by the plant life. Apparently our government missed that day in science class. It doesn't actually go into the atmosphere. The result of that and other government policies is that for the longest time, it was more affordable to buy a Mexican tomato in Manotick than a Manotick tomato in Manotick. So the price signal our government was sending local customers was that they should opt for the tomato that had to be put on a train and a truck and shipped right across the continent, burning fossil fuels the entire way there, and sending our money and our farm income to another country. And thus is the consequence when governments drive up the cost of farm production. Ça fait rien pour l'environnement.
That doesn't do much for the environment to increase a cost.
D'augmenter les coûts de production.
So to increase production cost here, because that forces consumer to buy products from overseas, products that are made by in agriculture that doesn't have our standard, that creates more greenhouse gas, and we are sending our money overseas. We have to do the contrary. That means that we have to bring in production here in Canada. We have to bring the common sense here.
To push farm production to other countries where they have lower standards and higher emissions. That just sends money and jobs out and pollution up. But yet, in countless different ways, our government is increasing the cost of farm production. Let's start with the carbon tax itself. Well, it does not apply to colored on-farm fuels. It does apply to everything else. Drying, in the case of mushroom farms, natural gas needed to power the farm, the off-farm transportation costs, and of course, any production of the fertilizers here in Canada would also face the carbon tax because of the inputs that go into fertilizers, and that drives up the cost of farm production here, costs that are not faced by farmers anywhere else, or at least in our main competitors south of the border and many of our other competitors around the world. As a result, Poilievre government will repeal the carbon tax and lower the cost of energy for our farmers so that we can repatriate our production to this country. We'll also repeal and reverse the tariffs that the government is imposing on fertilizer. Driving up fertilizer costs, of course, reduces farm production per acre and increases the cost of the final product, which is either picked up by consumers or by the farmer, and ultimately we are all losers in the process. The government's created further uncertainty by saying that it wants to set the goal of cutting fertilizer use by 30%, 1/3. Well, it's not clear exactly how they're going to achieve it. They are claiming right now it won't be through coercion, but of course they claim that the carbon tax would never go above $50 a ton, and now the plan is for it to go to $170 a ton. It is important for farmers to stand on guard against future attempts by the government to impose draconian anti-fertilizer policies that would ultimately be bad for the environment as well, because they would reduce per acre farm production and therefore require a greater land mass to produce the same amount of food and send more of our farm production out of the country to more polluting foreign jurisdictions. We understand as Conservatives that farmers use as little fertilizer as humanly possible because it is already expensive, and farmers, unlike government, don't like to waste money. So there is a built-in price incentive to minimize all inputs and maximize output. There is no further need for government to impose a coercive method of fertilizer use reduction on our farmers. Next, we have the cost of interest on debt. Of course, farmers, by necessity, must carry a large debt load in order to finance the land and the machinery that they buy. Our government, our federal government, told us that interest rates would be low for long. They tricked many Canadians into taking on big mortgages and high costs that they thought could be financed over long periods because of nearly permanently low interest rates. Well, surprise, in the last year alone, the Bank of Canada's rate has gone up 4.25%. Now, of course, the government will respond that they have absolutely nothing to do with interest rates. And while it is true that the Bank of Canada independently sets the rate, the domestic economic factors within the country are a major part of setting those rates. And right now, inflationary deficits compete with consumers for scarce goods, therefore driving up inflation. And they compete with borrowers for scarce credit, therefore driving up the cost of interest. Anybody who doesn't believe that government deficits influence interest rates is ignorant of 5,000 years of economic history. When governments are borrowing money, they increase the cost of borrowing for everybody. And that is why we need to cap government spending, cut government waste, and get back to a balanced budget to lower the pressure on inflation and interest rates for our farmers and consumers. Another major cost driver, of course, is labor. On a une pénurie de main-d'œuvre.
There is a shortage in labor, and we do not have enough workers here in Canada. Hence, we need temporary foreign workers. But bureaucracy to bring in these workers, it slows down everything, and it hinders the opportunity for these new Canadians to come here and to jumpstart their lives here in Canada as a worker and as citizen later on.
For temporary foreign workers who want to come here and potentially build a new life. I want to streamline and speed up temporary foreign worker applications so that we can get hardworking people from around the world. And I also want to simplify the process of those workers becoming permanent residents and eventually citizens so that they can add permanently to the strength of our workforce. We need more of a market-driven economic immigration system. Central planning does not work when you're making widgets or growing food or any other sort of economic production. It does not work in managing the labour market either. Whenever politicians and bureaucrats in Ottawa try to centrally plan our immigration system to try to determine what our labour market needs using reports and studies in Ottawa, they get it wrong. Instead, we should streamline the sponsorship of immigration by employers themselves. If more immigration were driven by job offers by employers, then we would fill actual job vacancies with people who can do those jobs. And in other words, let's get the government out of the way, speed up economic immigration for those people who have job offers, who are law-abiding, and have a track record rules. I will close down Roxham Road. Je vais fermer le chemin Roxham.
I would close by using, I would close Roxham Road, and I will use the efficiencies we have to invite easier the work.
Illegal border entry costs that are coming in through that entry, that illegal entry point, and use the savings to more quickly process economic immigration to fill vacancies that are desperately needed here in our country. There's also some local issues that we need to address. For example, our own government attacked our potato farmers in PEI over the potato wart issue, and has effectively shut down the export of seed potatoes from that province. The panel that engaged by the government to find out if our seed potatoes are safe has reported back and said that PEI potatoes are low risk. So if that is the case, then our government should get out of the way and reinstate export permits for our PEI potato farmers. And if Washington stands in the way, then we should raise our voice on behalf of the farmers in PEI to get our potatoes moving across the border again. And we need to get on this now. Planting season is upon us, and we can't ask our farmers in PEI to wait yet another year to address that very serious problem. That is another example, though, of government imposing unnecessary costs on our own people, making it more difficult for our farmers, and also advantaging our foreign competitors at Canadian expense. We need to stand on the side of the law-abiding, hard-working rural people right across this country, and that includes those who hunt or use firearms for sport shooting or for on-farm tools. It is a tool to have a firearm. Recently, the Trudeau government attempted to ban hunting rifles and table dropped 300 pages worth of firearms in a public safety committee that it wanted to criminalize at massive expense to all Canadians in enforcement. A Poilievre government will not allow any ban on your hunting rifles. We know that hunting is an integral part of rural communities, farming and otherwise, and only the Conservative Party can be depended upon to stop politicians from trying to ban that long-standing heritage that goes back, by the way, thousands of years before Europeans even arrived on what is now North American soil. But we as Conservatives will continue to stand for all farmers, tous les agriculteurs, que ce soit en supportant
all farmers through supply management.
Or whether it's supporting the cash croppers, the ranchers, the horticulturalists, the greenhouses, or the countless other agricultural producers who feed our country. The farmers are the backbone of our country. They put food on our plate. They require the great genius of understanding the sciences of the soil, the weather, the commodity prices to bring your food to your fork from their fields. And we are thankful to all of you for being part of the greatest agricultural sector anywhere on earth. So on behalf of the Conservative Party and our entire official opposition, we open our arms to you in a spirit of friendship and look forward to working with you as we move forward to a Conservative government that will put farmers first and bring production home to this country. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. All right, I welcome any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Poilievre. I'm Nick Langlar from the Chicken Farmers of Canada. I'm a farmer in Saskatchewan. Canada's dairy, poultry, and egg farmers are proud to raise food for Canadians under supply management. As you know, supply-managed farmers have been impacted by recent trade agreements. While we appreciate your party's commitment to supply management, there are always concerns among farmers anytime trade agreements are being negotiated. We appreciate you voting in favor of Bill C-282 at second reading. Can you reassure farmers that you will support the bill all the way through the legislative process?
So Conservatives have always succeeded in negotiating free trade agreements that protected supply management while opening up new markets for non-supply managed sectors. By contrast, the most recent USMCA deal not only gave away supply managed access to the Americans, but also restricted the ability of dairy farmers to export many of their products to the United States of America. A real lose-lose and a diplomatic failure on behalf of the Trudeau government. We will never have failures like that. We voted to send the bill to committee to study it because we share the goal of supporting supply management in international treaties, as we've always done, but at the same time we do need to open up new markets for other agricultural sectors, and we're going to study the bill at committee, hear from witnesses from all agricultural sectors and frankly all economic sectors, and ultimately our commitment is to protect supply management as we negotiate free trade agreements into the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Brent Preston. I'm the president of Farmers for Climate Solutions, and I farm near Creemore, Ontario. The CFA has played a really fantastic leadership role in the negotiations around the new sustainable agriculture strategy. In my community and all across Canada, I'm seeing more and more farmers getting excited about the idea that we can be a really positive force in the fight against climate change. And farmers putting forward practices and techniques that they developed on their own farms without a lot of outside support that can really quickly drive down emissions and sequester carbon in our soils, and we want to see those practices spread all across the country. And the one thing I think we all agree on is that farmers can't do it alone, that we shouldn't shoulder the whole burden of all the climate solutions that we have in agriculture. So my simple question is, what would a Conservative government do to support farmers like me and a lot of others in this room who want to be champions in the fight against climate change and want to reduce their emissions and increase the carbon they sequester in their soils?
Thank you very much for your question. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Our farmers have led the charge in zero-till and other methods that protect the environment, reduce emissions, and potentially continue to sequester carbon in the ground that would otherwise be in the air. We as Conservatives believe that there should be incentives to encourage more sequestration in the soil. I won't be revealing my election platform today, but we certainly will have incentives to benefit those farmers whose methods take carbon out of the atmosphere, put it into the ground, and minimize the emissions that they do that they release in the process. Thank you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre.
Hello, Mr. Poilievre, Marcel Groslo, ex-president of UPA and a farmer in Ontario. I'm within the X's. I will stop here. I am the president of a coalition that is called Feeding Humanity in a Sustainable Fashion. I have been in this endeavors for 30 years, and what I notice throughout the years is that our food system no longer can feed consumers in a sustainable way, that our producer have an increasingly reduced margin of benefit with a high interest rate, that they're all going towards a troublesome time, that we do not have new farmers, and that the government continues. The government no longer support the farmers towards what we call the environmental pivot. So I don't know if we have reached a certain limit, but I see that we have 34 billion that are produced by farmers, and 30% of our consumers do not eat as they should. They go to food banks, and we have farmers that cannot grow their companies. Question: how, as a Prime Minister, can you deal with this serious issue that we no longer can sustain?
Normal qu'ici au Canada.
Thank you for your question. I find it abnormal that in Canada, the country that has the fifth biggest per capita land, agricultural land in the world, it is incredible that a Canadian on five has to skip meals because they cannot afford grocery prices here in Canada. That's our reality. If I can be frank, this is what happens after 8 years of Justin Trudeau. The cost that is borne on our farmers, be it a carbon tax, tariffs on fertilizer, and we have taxes on houses and that are borne by our farmers at the end. There is increasingly costs that our farmers have to bear, and that is translated on our prices. I think that I want to stop the red tape. I want us to have more production here in Canada. I want to bring back accrued production here. We have known that exporting these costs is not a good thing to do. We have learned that through the COVID. But can the consumer's dollar, is that well shared within the food chain? What do you mean spread out or shared? Well, can everyone live fully from their company? Is the consumer's dollar shared equally in the field? Well, yes, probably not. There's not enough competition. Amongst our supermarkets, we need a further competition. This is the only way our farm producers could be compensated in a good way. The same for the airline sector. There's not enough competition. Only competition can increase choices for farmers and for consumers.
Greenhouse vegetable growers.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could make comment on what you would assess as the impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States on our competitiveness and our ability to attract investment.
Thank you. Well, the United States government is giving massive incentives to companies to invest in things like carbon capture and storage, hydrogen production, and countless other what are considered next-generation sources of energy and energy production and storage. I think we need to be, while we can't copycat everything the Americans do, we do need to be competitive because it will simply otherwise we'll have a magnet south of the border that just sucks away our money and our jobs. And we can do that. We have massive advantages over the Americans in a lot of respects. For example, we have the 5th biggest supply of lithium anywhere on planet Earth. But in 2021, we didn't produce a single tablespoon of the stuff, even though it's needed for electric car batteries. Why? Because it can take as long as 25 years to get a mine approved in Canada. I spoke to some First Nations leaders from the Ring of Fire area. They have been waiting 5 years and spent $50 million on applications to get a highway built to the Ring of Fire. Forget the Ring of Fire mines themselves, just the highway. I said, are the shovels in the ground? They said the snow shovels are in the ground. They literally have not built a single meter of highway. In Germany, they built a natural gas import terminal from the time it was announced to the time it was approved and constructed in 194 days. Here in Canada, you'd be lucky to get that done in 12 years. So if we want to compete in the world of electrification, we need to speed up permits. We rank 64th in the world for the time it takes to get a permit for anything, whether it's a farm, barn, or a pipeline, or an export terminal, a warehouse, a factory, you name it. We're one of the slowest places in the developed world to get a permit. We can subsidize until we're blue in the face, but if we're writing checks for mines that can't get permitted to be built, or pipelines that can't go in the ground, or factories that can't get building permits, then the money is not going to actually produce a productive outcome. So we have to speed up and lower the cost of doing business in Canada. We should be the fastest place in the developed world to safely get a building permit. That is how we're going to repatriate production to our country. That and reducing the tax burden to increase the after-tax return on investment. That's how we're going to bring home production, produce more food, produce more minerals, produce more of what is needed in the world. Let's bring it home. Thank you very much.